Welcome, everyone, to Coffee and an Interview. I'm Jacqueline Pena, your host, and I'm here today with Michelle Steiner. We're going to have a wonderful story to share with you today. You can't see her background in the podcast, but I want to say it's these beautiful butterflies, and it'll give you an idea of the personality and the brightness, because these are beautiful, bright butterflies, the person we're going to speak with today. But I'm going to stop there and let Michelle introduce herself before we jump into all the exciting questions.
Sure. Well, hello. My name is Michelle Steiner. I am from Pennsylvania. I live there with my husband Ron and our two cats, Jack and Sparrow. I am a writer, speaker, photographer, and paraeducator. I work in a school with students with disabilities and some who don't. And I also have a blog called Michelle's Mission, where I write about my life with a learning disability and feature my photography.
Love that name. I'm writing it down, Michelle's Mission. And so you're a multi-hyphenate because you mentioned a lot of different things that you're passionate
Yeah.
about, that you're good at, that you do. And I want to say, in case listeners don't know, Jack and Sparrow, two cats, is the character from Pirates of the Caribbean.
Yes, when we adopted them, the parents, the former owners were huge Disney fans and they were moving to Florida. And we thought the names were so cute that we just couldn't, rename them.
Oh, I love it. I love it. So now, in terms of the work you do, you have a lot of experience in working with students with different kinds of invisible
Mhm.
disabilities. And I know that a lot of the work you do is in sharing information about that and helping others. Tell us a little bit more about that, because many of us, um, we live in this world, so we work and we live with people with different invisible disabilities. Many of us might have invisible disabilities as well listening to the show. So tell us a little bit about that work.
Well, a lot of the work that I do at the school is helping students in the classroom, and it's also assisting the teacher with work. And sometimes it might be just working with a student to reinforce a concept that maybe they don't understand. But all the kids know I can help them with anything except for math. And other times it's really showing my students how to advocate, because one day all my students will leave me, but they really need to know how to speak up for themselves. And some of them are just really hesitant. They don't want to talk about it, or they're like, I'm afraid to ask. And I'll say, well, I'll go with you to ask, and we'll do that. And then they get that confidence. And before you know it, they're not afraid. They're raising their hand in class. They're asking for support, and they're getting those really important skills at that time. And I also do advocacy work with my blog. That is a really big part of my life. I write about my life with just having a learning disability, because there's so many misconceptions about what it means to have a learning disability. We're so used to seeing disabilities that we can see, physical ones, someone in a wheelchair, somebody that has Down syndrome, what their face might look like, and people don't realize that other kinds of disabilities are out there too that we can't always see. So I think it's really important that people have an understanding of that. And there's also misconceptions about learning disabilities. So I try to write about that and just my life and my experiences. And I also feature my photography. I'm not able to drive because of my disability. So I get that chance to notice details and take pictures of flowers and other things that I would miss if I was behind the wheel of a car.
Wow. I love how you're looking at the opportunities, the beauty and the
Mm-hmm.
opportunities. And a lot of the conversations I've had today are about mindset shifts. And that was powerful for me. So thank you for sharing that. Um, you talked about invisible disabilities and all these misconceptions, and you were talking
Mm-hmm.
about what we might see with visible, for lack of a better term, visible disabilities or
Right.
differences. To help us understand that, tell us more about some of the misconceptions. What should we know about invisible disabilities?
I think the biggest thing is that invisible disabilities are real, because a lot of times will tell someone, oh, I have a learning disability. And they'll say, well, you don't look like you're disabled. And I have to tell them, well, some disabilities we can see and other ones we can't. And sometimes they're looking for the wheelchair or the cane, and that's not there. And oftentimes, too, a big misconception is people are thinking that's giving me a compliment. They'll say, well, I'm complimenting you, or I don't see you as disabled. And I think to myself that that really isn't, while it's maybe well intentioned, there is nothing wrong with having a disability, whether it's one that we can see or it's one that we can't see. It's something that is a part of my life. And I think that that's not a bad thing to be disabled. And anybody can come and join the disability club at any time in their life, whether you're born with that disability or you get an acquired one, or even as you get older with experiences with your body. Anybody can be disabled at any time. So I think taking that shame away from disability is just so crucial to that.
Yeah. You talked about taking away the shame, and you
Mm-hmm.
we're talking about the stigma that a lot of times people
Mm-hmm.
feel when it comes to living with a disability, visible or invisible. And I think for many of us, I'm looking at both sides, right? So
Mm-hmm.
if I have an invisible disability, how do I handle feelings of shame or the stigma that's placed on it? And if I'm a person living or working, coexisting with anyone with an invisible
Mm-hmm.
disability, how can I avoid making that person feel shame or stigma?
I think that for a person with a disability, that's a process of accepting it. I can remember in the very beginning, I didn't want to share having one because of being bullied as a child for having that. In fact, I was in a writing group for adults, and I was writing some really bad poetry and some other things. And some of the members of the group said, you should really write about having a learning disability. And I thought, oh no, that's way too personal. And our group still meets 20, well, actually 30 some years later. And when I finally got that courage to write about having a disability, that's what gave me that voice. That was so healing for me. So for me personally, writing about it and talking about it helps because other people say, well, that's my story. And by sharing my story, that gives other people to feel safe about talking about having one. So I think sharing your story, uh, talking with other people that have disabilities is really important. And for other people that may not know that you have one or may know that you have one, I think the big thing is respect, treating that person just as you would want to be treated with having one or without having one, just really going out there to be there. Definitely a lot of listening, offering support, but also uh, it would just be like how you would offer support to anybody else. I can remember I was in a grocery store a few years ago, and I have limited hand dexterity in both of my hands, and I've learned to adapt. And the store was pretty busy, and I'm unloading my cart, just doing my thing here. And a woman comes up behind me, and she starts unloading my groceries on the conveyor belt, and I'm like, okay, this is a little weird. And but I thought, okay, maybe she's just trying to be nice. And I smiled and said, thank you so much. And she goes, yeah, I like to help people when you really look like you need help.
Oh
And
boy.
as much as yeah, you would appreciate that. I'm definitely helping other people. If a senior citizen sometimes will ask me to get something off the shelf at the grocery store, I'm more than willing to help. But I don't go and start putting stuff in somebody's cart or trying to unload that. And I think it's just how we would do that common courtesy with other people, with helping and with asking too. And I think that is really something too, to just treat them like there's somebody else, just like anybody else that you would treat. And most people with disabilities, they know what they need to do, and they're okay with that most of the time. I know whenever I go out with my friends, if we're at the mall, I also, with my visual perception, I can't use the escalator. And I know I just go and get an elevator, and sometimes they might forget. And one time I remember one of my friends said, I'm just so amazed. She goes, you just go and do what you need to do. And I'm thinking, well, this is part of my life. This is my way of getting there. You can go on the escalator and I can do the elevator. And I think that is just so key, is knowing people with disabilities usually do know what to do.
It's systems and tools. That was such an interesting example. So both of them were the supermarket one just reminds me of this idea of consent too. So not making
Mhm.
sure you're not helping the person feel shame and how you do things or say things, but this concept of consent. Would you like some help with your groceries? Would you like me to help you with the cart? And that's something that I started thinking more about after the end of season one. Our last
Mhm.
episode is about consent, this idea of asking. So that piece was completely skipped. She just stuck her hands in your cart and put all the things on
Yeah,
the belt. There was no
I
consent.
know.
And you're like, okay, should I feel bad? Should I feel like this person is helping me? So I thought that was an interesting example. And I loved what you said about acceptance, learning to navigate and
Mhm.
accepting and embracing and learning. And then you
Mhm.
ended with the example of the mall with your friends and taking the elevator and the acceptance and the strategies you develop this is your life and you have your strategies and we have to respect those strategies and that process, so
Mhm.
that's very helpful. So I'm sure you provide a lot of these stories to the students you work with. Tell me about how you use your live experiences in helping those you do help in the school system and beyond.
A lot of times I might tell a student I have a disability. Sometimes I might just say, oh, I'm bad at math. But a lot of times it just really depends on the situation and it depends on the child too that I'm working with. But I understand what a lot of them are feeling. And I think that is so important because I understand just where they're at. It's like hearing a recording of myself. I hate my disability. I wish I didn't have it. I don't feel smart. And I get that chance to go in and say, you are smart. And it's not a bad thing to have a disability. And sometimes we do talk about accommodations. Sometimes we might bring it up, or we might be talking about that I needed them when I was at college, if we're in a learning strategies class. And that helps them to know that it's okay to have things to struggle with, but not to give up on things that they would want to do, and to really look for those ways to be successful.
I love that. And I like the looking at accommodations. You want to use them
Mm-hmm.
where you need them, and that opens you up to continue doing the other things you want to do. But sometimes we need
Yes.
accommodations here or there, and learning to
Mm-hmm.
understand that and be able to ask for those accommodations.
Yes.
What are the biggest challenges you think for I'm going to break it down into groups. What are the biggest challenges you think for K through 12 students with invisible disabilities? Let's start there and then we'll tackle older groups.
I think when you're really young with having an invisible disability, it's wrapping your head around sometimes that you have one, because you hear a lot of people saying, "Oh, you have a disability," but then you still have that mindset that that person with the disability is in the wheelchair. So it's really getting that head, wrapping that around your head that you have one. And sometimes it's also confusing because people might tell you, "Oh, you need to use your, make, we have these accommodations that you need." And then on the other hand, people will say, well, you need to learn to work with distractions, or you're not going to get those in the real world. So I think that that is hard. You can't use it as a crutch. So I think that's really hard. And it's such a fine line to walk between having an excuse, but also having that reason, and what we do in those situations to be able to compensate, I think is hard too. And it's just finding that identity. I think sometimes it's hard for maybe other kids to understand as well. If somebody, for example, has autism, I think that's hard for sometimes other children to understand. They're like, why is that person doing that or saying that? And we have to just learn to look at that and say that that's not necessarily something that is bad. That's just who the person is, and that's their way of interacting with the world. So that can be really hard for peers to understand. And it was also hard for me whenever I was growing up and going in school, because I went to a very small conservative school district where everybody knew each other. And even though you couldn't see my disability, I couldn't hide the fact that I went to learning support for classes or to get a test read aloud. And when I was in regular ed classes, that I struggled. So I quickly got labeled that outcast.
Oh, wow.
Hmm.
Outcast, that was the label.
Yes. And as an adult, I think some of the struggles are when you go to get a job or you're at college, people can't see the disability again. So they can't understand, well, why can't you get this? I sometimes will tell people, well, I'm not able to help out with math or I'm not able to understand this. And people will say, well, I'm telling you, or I'm teaching you and I'm showing you. And I'm thinking, okay, we've gone over things like this in the past. It's just not one of those things that really works. And sometimes you'll have an adult that can go through a job interview and pass and do really well, especially if they have really good verbal skills and really good communication skills and they interview well. But then they get to the job and they might need an accommodation to do the job. And then the employer just has no idea why. They think, well, we hired this person thinking that they didn't have any disabilities. And whether you disclose or not, there's advantages and disadvantages to that in an interview. And that is one of the things that sometimes I have to be really mindful of if I'm in an interview is I'm also interviewing the company to see if this is going to be a good fit and see if they're going to be accommodating. And if I'm starting to get this idea that, oh, I don't think they're going to be accommodating, then it's really important that I really carefully consider whether I want to take that job or not.
Yeah. Oh. I mean, thank you for sharing those distinctions because I was taking that K through 12 study. And then when you go to the workforce and you jumped right into that distinction, I think it gets very tricky when you go into the workforce because in K through 12, you have a community teams who are
Yep.
trained to understand invisible disabilities. And in the workforce, we don't have that.
Nope.
And so, someone might not understand why you're not getting this math problem when I'm here explaining it to you. You're going to get it. And you're like, yeah, no, it doesn't work that way.
Exactly.
It's a very, very important terms. And so when you get into the workforce, we were talking about
Hmm.
advice in general with acceptance if you have an invisible disability and listening and respect if you're working or living
Hmm.
in spaces with others who have invisible disabilities. What are some tips you think in terms of those in the school system who need support? What are some tips for
Hmm.
success? And then for those in the workforce already, what are some tips for success there?
One of the biggest things with students is to really work with their teachers and support staff to be able to make sure they are understanding information and to advocate if they have a question. I think that is so important. Our students need to know how to speak up. They need to know how to ask for help, but they also need to know how to do some of that work on their own in life as well too. So I think it's just learning how your brain works. And I think having parents and staff using appropriate, age appropriate language is so important. My mom and dad told me that when I was little that I wasn't dumb. My brain just worked differently and I had to learn it in a different way. And that was better information than I was getting from my peers. So I think that's really important. And I think it's just for students also to have the representation with reading about adults that have been successful with having a disability. I know when I was growing up, there wasn't a lot of that. So I think that's important for that. And it's also just working and thinking, okay, what am I good at? And really focus in on those talents that everybody has, that you are really good, that each person has, things that they can do, things that they like to do, and start thinking in the future, well, what is it that I would like to do that I'm really good at? Because that can be a really good starting point for going into adulthood. For adults, I would just really recommend that they also focus on their strengths. I knew when I was going to college that becoming a certified teacher was not going to be the best course of action for me. I'm a terrible test taker And I also knew that I just couldn't pass some of the certification tests. But I knew I wanted to work with students and I wanted to go to college. So I found a program that has the least amount of math and science, had the least amount of math and science possible, and had accommodations. And it was a program that I loved. And I could put my heart into that. I just wasn't going into a program that was for adults that had disabilities that people thought, well, this is a really great idea. And for me, that just, I needed to really like what I was doing and find a way to be able to do that. And I think it's also advocating for yourself. I think that's really important too, because people can't, especially if you have a disability that others can't see, it's real important to educate others so they know how to be able to help you. And it's really also really important to know what your disability is and how to speak up for that. And I always tell people if they're going to talk about their disability or they're going to ask for accommodations, I have some tips with that. I usually tell people to send an email or even pull somebody aside and arrange a time to sit down and talk about
Mhm.
that. Come in there really calm and really cool and collected and just explain what your disability is and the accommodation that you're going to need, and go get a plan with that too. And that is just, and it's sometimes helpful to be able to role play that with somebody else before you go out and you ask that. And even afterwards, keep in touch if it's working or not, because sometimes something might be working great, other times it may not be working good, and then we have to go back in and maybe do some little changes. And most importantly, document everything, because if you never documented it, it never happened.
Yep. And it has to start with that conversation. And I love that you said, reach out in person or via email to set up the meeting, to
Mm-hmm.
have the conversation. You don't want to have the whole conversation via text or email. You
No.
want to really sit down and, yeah, have that conversation and be clear about where you're at and the kinds of accommodations you
Yep.
need. It's an honest conversation. I wish more people had those in the workplace, because what a great opportunity to support our team members. If there's a way we can support you even better, you just have to tell me how, so that you're able to fulfill your duty so
Mm-hmm.
you feel like you're being successful. And I think it's a win-win across the board.
Exactly.
Wow, so many wonderful tips and advice and nuggets of information, like I say, that we can take away, whether we're an individual with an invisible disability or we're working or living
Mm-hmm.
with one, right? We talked a little bit about the school system. We talked about career.
Mm-hmm.
We haven't talked too much about social relationships. I don't
Yes.
have the best term, but yeah, but friends and
Mm-hmm.
family, whether you're in your younger years in the school system or you're older as an adult in your 20s,
Mm-hmm.
30s, 40s, what can you share there in terms of some challenges and some strategies and opportunities to support?
I think sometimes whenever you have families, especially if it's your first child and they get diagnosed with a disability, that can be really difficult. I know that was how it was for my family. My was my parents' first child, so they didn't have a lot of information on development. So the school recommended when I went to kindergarten that I get tested for having one, and sure enough, I do have one. But my mom and dad advocated for me, and I think that made all the difference. I ran into one of my first learning support teachers a few years ago, and I had that chance to thank her, and she said, of course, it was because I worked hard, but also because my parents were involved. If my mom had a concern, she would call the school, and if the teacher had a concern, she would call my parents. And it was them working together that really made that difference. And I think it's also advocating for your child and encouraging their voice to be heard too. Whenever I was young, they didn't invite children to go to their IEP meetings, but my parents would always say, "Hey, we have your IEP meeting coming up. Is there anything you want us to talk about?" And I would say what my concerns were, and they would get back to me on that. And it's having that voice. And now we have students at a certain age where they can attend part of their IEP meetings. And I think that that's really putting that child in the center of being able to ask questions and to have that advocacy. So I think that is really important. I think it's also drawing on the strengths of what a child can do and compared to what they can't do. I know my dad, he read me a story every night when I was little, and I learned to love books, and he found a story about a dinosaur that I wrote in second or third grade. And he said, "Wow, this is really good." And reading and writing became my world. And we focused on what I could do. We had a lot of long, tearful homework sessions, many nights, and I had to do my best. That was all I had to do. Sometimes I didn't always do well in school. And sometimes that's a challenge because other people would say, well, aren't you punishing her? Or why are you letting her get away with bad grades? And my parents had to learn, well, they couldn't do that. And that it just wasn't the right method. And that the school really educated my family on that as well. So I think it's really encouraging their child to try their best but not expecting perfection. And I also think it's going for those strengths. I think that's really important. I also think family or friends is really important for a child. I knew whenever I was being bullied that I just was not making friends with my peers in my school. Everybody, especially whenever I was in high school, everybody had their own group, and a lot of that bullying intensified. And I just really didn't feel like I fit in anywhere. And I decided that I went outside of my community. I went to a art group just a little bit outside of my school district, and it was with kids who went to a different school, and they were all doing the same things that I like to do, and they didn't go to my school, so I could shed that reputation that followed me since I was really young. And then I went to that group for adults with writing, and we still meet all those years later. And when I was in college and struggling, they couldn't fix the fact that I was having trouble in a class, but we could go out on a Saturday and we could laugh and have fun. And they were great with rides too. And I think that's important because kids need to have people in their lives that don't have disabilities. And then I also think it's key that they have friends who do have disabilities as well. And all of these people can just fit in that person's life. But we want to make sure they're having friends that are involved in things that are good and also things that they really enjoy doing too, because everybody has something that they like to do, and there is a group for that. And I also think that's one of the benefits of the internet because with a lot of the social media, it definitely has its dark side, but I got a chance to, I had the opportunity to meet other people that have my type of disability. And that's not something that I had before. So it's really affirming when you get to hear other people's perspectives with having the same issues.
Wow. No, definitely. I like how you talk about the puzzle pieces, right? You have your tribe and
Hmm.
everyone fits together in different ways and they have
Yep.
different purposes, and then just kind of fit together. You'll fit together as one
Hmm.
puzzle, all these puzzle pieces. Hmm.
Yes.
Very, very interesting. Family and friends and the puzzle pieces. That was a great insights into that because I think school's one thing and then workplace is another thing and just
Hmm.
day-to-day life is another thing. And I like your examples of the different tribes you found. You found new students
Hmm.
in your school, you found your writing group. So really trying to build in and create all those different tribes. Very helpful. We've been talking a little bit about um, and different strategies and for different age groups and different experiences. What else would you like to share with us that I haven't asked you about yet in terms of living with an invisible disability or working or living or knowing socially or in other ways someone with an invisible disability?
I think one of the things too is with relationships too. I always knew I wanted to get married, but I thought, well, what am I going to, would someone love me with having a disability? And I just remember my ex was breaking up with me, and he was saying, "Oh, I wish I could." He was saying, "Well, I think you could drive if you wanted to, but and I'm tired of taking you places." And other people have just rejected me with having one, and I just got to a point where I didn't want to be with anyone until it was the right person. And I remember praying about that, and then God really gave me my husband. And I met him when I wasn't even expecting it. I was walking down the street and I was wearing a red dress and I was volunteering at the art center. And he goes, "Who's that girl in that dress? And where's she going?" And it turns out we were going to the same place and we had mutual friends. And it also is it was really interesting. There were signs all around that we should be, that I was going to meet him. I was, years before I met him, I was volunteering at the art center, and I had a friend who asked me, "Are you seeing anyone right now?" And I said, "No." And he said, "I think you're going to meet someone at a place like this." And lo and behold, that's where I met him. And then another friend of mine had a dream that I was standing in front of the courthouse with a vintage wedding dress on, getting married, and he didn't know who the guy was. So the vintage dress I could see, that's definitely my style. I wondered why I would be in front of the courthouse and who is this guy? And when we had our reception, the photographer took us on a little walk up the street, and it was in a park that overlooked the courthouse. And I'm standing in my vintage wedding dress with my husband.
Oh, wow. Awesome. So that incredible story. Tell us more about how you met and what made him different and what made this relationship turn into a marriage.
One of the first things, he got to know me as a friend first, which was really important. He had a job, he was transitioning from one job to another, and he was staying with family. So that summer, he would come over once a week when we had our art center and we got to know each other. I think it was like once a month he would come home, and that continued even after we were together. And I think that one of the things too is he was the first person that ever asked me when we were on our very first date how it felt to have a learning disability. And I thought, no one ever asked me that.
Mm.
And I thought this is definitely something that I would like to see happen. And we took that time and we decided that we really cared about each other. And it's not to say there's not a learning curve with having a partner with a disability, but it's one of those things that if that person's willing to work with you on, that it's definitely worth it. I He is very supportive of me. He's able to give me a ride to work or wherever else I need to go, and I have a very sweet coworker that takes me home at the end of the day. And I also have to think, as much as I have that support, it's influenced my decision to live in an area that's in a central location where I can walk to where I need to go to. And sometimes I do that as well. But I just want to say, with having if someone's worried about someone accepting you with a disability, the right person is going to love you with that. And if that person can't accept you with having a disability, then that's just not the right person for you.
Mhm. I love that. Thank you for sharing your love story in essence, right?
Mhm.
How you met and came to be where you are, married with two cats, Jack and Sparrow.
Yes.
That's great. So much positive energy and so many positive examples, words of advice, and tips for advocacy shared today. I want to thank you for that, Michelle. It really has been an incredible conversation around
Mhm.
invisible disabilities and really looking at it from different angles to
Mhm.
just broaden our thinking around this and thinking differently, whether we're the ones with the invisible disabilities as listeners or we,
Mhm.
again, live or work or know anyone with a disability. So thank you so much for sharing that. And for our listeners, we have description. In the description, we'll have links, we'll have other information for you, so you'll be able to click. Michelle, thank you so much for being with us today with this wonderful, colorful butterfly background that I appreciate so
Thank
much.
you.
I can see the art and the energy pouring from it. And any final words, anything else that you might want to share with us as we close our interview?
I would just love to tell people that success doesn't always come in the package that we expect, but sometimes it comes in something even better.
Oh my gosh, we're going to quote that. That's amazing. Thank you so much, Michelle, for being here. Thank you all for listening. And I hope you got some great nuggets of information, some great coffee beans of information out of today's interview. Thank you for listening to Coffee and Interview. And Michelle, thank you once again.
Thank you so much.